Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this episode of the Empowered Artist Collective podcast. I am Jennifer Apple, she, her, and I am with an incredible guest who you can see it if you go and watch this on YouTube because there is the YouTube video, but our guest is wearing the most impeccable lipstick shade that matches our like background tone, which matches their hair. Like y'all, I'm here with the incredible Amy Jo Jackson. Hello.
Hello. Yes, it's always important in an oral medium to have, a pop of color. I feel like it tracks, it carries
Completely.
to the ear pods.
And it also just literally actually works with our color scheme. It's kind of gorgeous. And by kind of, I mean incredible. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Of course. For those who are listening, how would you like to introduce yourself today? Who are you today? What do we need to know about you in this current moment?
Wow, great. I'm Amy Jo, AJJ, Ajax, whatever. And let's see. I'm a performer. I am a cabaret artist. I am a writer. I am a songwriter. I'm a podcaster. I have my own podcast. I'm a dialect coach and voice and text person and just general, theater maker about town and wherever people will pay me to make theater, really.
I feel like about town is relative because I feel like you literally are about all the towns.
True.
I feel like
we've got the circuit,
Yeah. I feel like the full circuit is realming around. I kind of want to just jump into I don't even know if what's time, but your most recent real large endeavor of your show that you've created, written. I mean, I just want to hear all about that from inception to now. We can go into it, but just let's jump into that.
Great.
It's wild.
Assuming you're talking about my musical Hatchetation, but I have another show called the Brass Menagerie that I actually did more recently. But that I also wrote. That one with a little help from Tennessee Williams, but the Hatchetation is original to moi. It is about the temperance activist Carrie A. Nation, who lived in Kansas at the turn of the last century. And she was, let's just say, peeved at the lack of enforcement of the liquor laws because Kansas was a dry state at this time. And so she, at the age of 54, began going into bars with a hatchet and breaking up the contents herself. And so I've written a full-length 2-act, 10-actor musical with everyone except for the actor who plays Carrie doubles and plays a ton of different roles. And it's written to be entirely performed by femme, trans, and gender nonconforming performers. And it's wild and zany and anachronistic and extremely, I would say my aesthetic when creating my own work is walking that line between extremely stupid and yet hopefully quite smart. Brilliant as well.
Brilliant.
Thanks. Yeah. We'll take it.
I'm going to say that.
But yeah, so I had the great honor and good fortune to be selected for the O'Neill last summer, NMTC, the National Music Theater Conference. So I went and did that in June, and the score wasn't finished yet because this is my first musical I've written of any kind, but I've done a lot of parody lyrics and poetry over the years. So the writing aspect came much more quickly to me than the composing aspect. Yeah. So I had an incredible experience there and got a 29-hour reading, which was amazing, with an incredible cast. And then, I finished it. That's right. I finished a rough draft of the score, I think 2 years to the day of when I first pitched it to my writing mentor. And I felt very good about that, even though now I've rewritten a couple of those songs since then. But yeah, I mean, just continuing the journey of getting the arrangements done and the basic demos, and which then sheet music follows after that. Because I can read music, but I have trouble. I don't play. So I have trouble. It takes a long time for me to do notation. Whereas for some people, that's a thing they don't have to think about. So they, that's why I work with an arranger, and, you have someone transcribe it and do all that. So that just takes time because I can't do it all. But yeah, that's where that is.
I have so many questions.
Yeah.
First and foremost, the story itself is wild. How did you
Yeah.
find that as the idea, or what
She,
inspired this?
well, she's a historical figure that I'd say was much more well known, like probably to our parents' generation, because
Okay.
she died in 1911. So she was just kind of like a wild figure that you'd hear about. And because her name is Carrie A. Nation, the full name is Carrie Amelia Moore. Gloyd was the name of her first husband, who died of alcoholism when he was like 27, which kind of launched her on this whole journey. And then David Nation was her second husband. So, when your name becomes a verb and a mantra and a battle cry, basically, she was extremely good at branding. Yeah. She had little hatchet pins made with her name on them that she would sell to pay her train fare. And hatchetation is a Carrie Nation word. Like, that's what she called a smash up, as she'd call it a hatchetation, because she loved a portmanteau, as do we all. But I think I had heard of her, but not really known really anything about her. And then there's a podcast I love called Criminal, hosted by this woman, Phoebe Judge. And it's really great because it's it is a true crime podcast, but it's not like super murder heavy, really. It's more just like really interesting stories of what criminal can kind of take a lot of different meanings. So she did this story on Carrie Nation, and I was like, this woman sounds incredible. But it was before I was really even considering myself a writer, like formally. I was mainly just doing cabaret and solo stuff was the stuff I was making. So I just like filed it away as like, oh, I love that. Like I bought a hatchet pin off Etsy. I found one of her hatchet pins because I was just like, I really dug the story. And then when I was looking for material, I started taking this developing materials class with this woman, Danny Super, through the She Collective, which is a lovely group run by a couple of awesome women in the industry. And so I was taking this developing materials class thinking I'd work on more solo stuff. And she very gently, after a couple of weeks, was like, you don't need my help with this. This is a thing you already do. Like, sure, I'll help you with it, but it's not going to take the 10 weeks of this course. What do you want to work on?
Yeah.
And so I thought I was writing a play. And then she was like, I think this is energetically musical. And I was like, how dare you? Absolutely not. I'm not writing a musical. And then like 3 days later, I was like, oh, God,
here we
writing
go.
A musical.
Yeah.
I just made my job a lot harder, longer, and more expensive. But that's what it wanted to be. Wow. And so that's kind of how that came up.
And then for somebody who doesn't, say, as you were saying, like your strong suit isn't the like writing of the music or the composing rather of the music, how do you, is it more like you sit and you voice note yourself? Do you plunk it through and then send it to an arrange? What's your process with that?
Kind of all of that. What I'll do, I'm a strong melodist and I'm a decent vocal arranger because I write on my voice, and it's not that I don't hear like counterpoints and stuff underneath it, but I just don't have the formal training in that way because like, I played piano for a couple years as a kid and it was just so many steps for my brain. I think especially as a singer, that just feels like thinking to me in a way that it did not. I got so many stickers for memorization because I would look at it and be like, all right, this is the part that sounds like this. And then my fingers could do it because I knew what it sounded like, which is, how I learn a lot of vocal parts too, is just by memorizing patterns and having strong oral recall, which as a dialect coach also makes sense that I'm very like, that's the strongest way in which I learn. So I'll usually write and sculpt the melody along with a lyric, but I think only one song have I ever written with a musical idea that preceded the lyrical idea. Like I usually will just build music off of what it is. I'll know sometimes vibe wise what I'm after, but I will build the melody off of the lyric. And then I will sit down with my mic and GarageBand and I'll lay it out depending on the song. If it's more like, so the show's very anachronistic. So I have music that's much more contemporary. So if it's like more of a driving rock song, I'll put basic chords underneath it and then send it off to my arranger and be like, this, but better. Yeah. Can you do this, but more sophisticated, please? Right. But sometimes there's songs that I'm like, it's not really, it's too complicated. What I want underneath it to just put chords under it. So I will just like have like a click track or a snap track and send her a lot. I'll always send her a lot of comps, like references. Like I have this one number that's kind of like 70s variety show style. And so that was the most fun to just like get different videos of like Carol Burnett and Cher on the Carol Burnett show, and like stuff off the Dean Martin show and all that kind of stuff. But 3 Girls 3. So yeah, that's how I tend to do that sort of thing.
How'd you find your arranger?
Her name is Pearl Ryan, and she's an actor, and a tremendous actor, and actor muso, as I believe they're called. She was in Great Comet.
Okay.
She plays the violin and a lot of other stuff, piano. So I had known her from around, because she's also like a Shakespeare actor nerd type person, and we met at a class at the Pearl, like 2014, something like that, 2013. And then we're just kind of in each other's lives. And I did a Zoom read of some rewrites that I did, and had her read in. And then she like emailed me being like, hey, I think you're a really strong lyricist. If you ever need any vocal arrangements, let me know. And I was like, wait a minute, I need any arrangements. I need piano arrangements. And so she dug the music. And so she was like, yeah, I'm on board. So I really credit her with being able to get us the O'Neill, because it's like, I may have like strong musical ideas, but if I can't like put them across because I don't have that skill set, it's like you need a collaborator. And so she's fantastic, and also very funny. So she gets what I'm after without me having to explain the tone at all, which is a relief, because that's I think where a lot of people get congested, even in just like a rehearsal room. It's like just all trying to get on the same page can be exhausting. And when you know someone, you're like, no, I already know we're on the same page.
Oh, that's so good. Well, I guess my transition then would be doubling back to the fact that you have so many cabarets. Maybe it's like the main one that you have, right? But like, I feel like you are cabaretist. Is that the word? Cabaretist?
I use cabaretist, but it's, I spell it like a German.
Yeah, cabaretist.
But, but I think a lot of people would say cabaret artist, but I think cabaretist has more panache, more style.
We love that. So as a cabaretist, talk to me, let's double back to even before, when all of that started for you, how the love of that started, how the craft of the development of that started, and I guess the morphing of what it was to now, because it's been a whole journey. Yeah. And I'm curious about that.
Sure. I've always kind of been interested in doing cabaret, but I think I had, when I was younger, an idea that it had to be a more formally sculpted, written, and then I went and did this kind of thing. So I never did it, because I was like, what do I have to write about myself that's that interesting that I would want to sit and listen to an hour of it? You know what I mean? No offense to everyone who's done their, and then I moved to New York cabaret, but like really, unless you have a really interesting version of that. We all did that because we're all sitting here at the Green Room 42 watching you do it, you know?
Correct.
So I think what I didn't realize when I was younger is what I was experiencing was like, I didn't have a point of view yet. And so I didn't know what it was I wanted to say. So I was like, well, I'm not going to spend the time and money to say it. Like I can look back now and go like, that's what the issue was. So basically it would have been 2014. And yes. And I did some cabaret that was a fundraiser. That's right. It was a Broadway Cares fundraiser that was a joint fundraiser between Mark Fisher Fitness and Kinky Boots, because there were a ton of people in Kinky Boots who worked at MFF, so I was the dialect coach on Kinky Boots from the out of town until we closed in 2019. And so I got asked to sing in it, because even though I wasn't in the show, I'm a performer. And the director, Will Nunziata, who I'm now like telling this story, I'm like, yes, this is the most Will move ever. I like sent him and Brian Nash, who would go on to become like my closest collaborator and one of my dearest friends. But this was our first time, first or second time really working together was on this thing. And I sent them a list of a few songs that might work. And they chose, of course, like the biggest, beltiest one. And then I went and rehearsed it. And apparently Brian texted Will like, oh my, this is going to be really great. And so Will comes up to me at soundcheck. He's like, I'm thinking of putting you last. And I was like, what? Because there were I think Katie Huffman and Katie Finneran both performed on this thing too. It's like, they're literal Tony winners. I can't go last. He's like, I love drama. I love stakes. And I was like, cool. Cool. So then, yeah, we did. It was like we did 2 shows worth, and I don't normally get nervous to perform, but it did feel like
Yeah.
stakes for me because a lot of these people had never heard me sing, and suddenly I'm
Mhm.
like belting my
Which,
eyeballs out.
y'all, Amy Jo Jackson can sang. Sang,
Thank
sing, sing.
you.
Google the Google,
Thank
for
you. There's
real.
so much on YouTube. An
The
embarrassment
No,
on
like
YouTube,
a
really.
plethora
A
of
plethora.
riches. Yeah.
By the way, hot tip to those listening, I have gotten auditions and jobs from YouTube. Put the content out there. Like, just, you never know. I got an audition for a principal in a TV show. I didn't book it, but I got that audition because
Yeah.
a woman found me on YouTube looking for singers. I wasn't available for that audition, but then I was right for something else. I
Oh, no.
never would have been in for something like that if it wasn't for the fact I just had a bunch of stuff available to find. So,
Yep.
hot
I
tip.
had that too. I had that this past year when I did title of show back right after, as the pandemic, we were coming out of the smoke or whatever. I got an email. Hi, Max Hunter, sliding into my DMs of my emails. I almost deleted it. I thought it was spam. And he was literally making me a straight offer to play Susan in title of show because he saw my content online and he did a little bit of a deep dive and he was like, "You're right for this." And I was like, "Who are you?" Prove to me you're a real person.
Yeah.
And I mean, it ended up being an incredible situation and it worked out for all the reasons, but like I had stuff online.
I will sidebar to continue this
Yeah.
real quick because
Please.
before I actually started doing these solo shows, some friends of mine and I wanted more specific content on our YouTube channels. Because I'm also talking like not the earliest days of YouTube, but this is like 10 years ago now, probably like 2009, 2010 is when I think I started my YouTube channel. And so I was looking for stuff that I could send in with a submission.
Yeah.
I was like, if I'm going in for Sally Bowles, I want to be able to send them a link to me singing Colored Lights because then they can choose to watch it or not.
Correct.
But if they're doing pre-screens, at least it's out there. And so I started putting together with a few friends. We did a couple of like content cabarets where basically we got like 3 to 6 of us together, depending on the night, and did a couple of these where we just invited our friends to say, look, suggested donation. And we're just like, we would get someone with a camera. And then in one of them, one of our friends had a brother in film school. And so they like came for free, 3 students, because they were like, well, we don't have anything like this on our reels.
Right.
So they like brought 2 cameras and good sound equipment and filmed our dinky little thing. But then we all had very specific content that we wanted on our YouTube channels. And it's like that, it's great to have video of you in a studio singing something, but if you can get things in front of an audience, it just, I think, reads better. When I'm looking for people, that tells me more about how you're landing. But obviously anything is better than nothing. But like, there's so many ways to get content that aren't like, how am I going to produce an entire show? You don't have to get together with some friends.
Yeah. And especially nowadays that people are used to the idea that like, oh, we're in COVID land and we're all our own quote unquote producers and editors and whatever from the comfort of our own homes. I think there's this idea and understanding now that like when you put it on in your living room, we know you're in your living room, we're cool with it. Like just own the fact that you're in your living room and then live your best life, So there's a level of acceptance that I think prior to pandemic life, people were more like, you need to rent out that studio or else.
Oh God, no. Yeah. Either, don't spend the money at all because there's no need, or like put in the effort, but share the burden among friends and just like, try to make something fun out of it that like you will enjoy. So thinking about it, those were actually like my earliest like concert producing days. Cause I was basically in charge of putting those together and coordinating all of that kind of stuff and just making sure that it was fun for the people attending and not just like a technical thing for us,
Right.
So anyway, I did this concert 54 Below. I had my one song, and then like less than a week later, I had an email from Will asking like, what are your thoughts on me helping you build a cabaret around yourself? I was like, my thoughts are, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't know how to do it. And we met. He also had the end with 54 Below. I didn't know anyone there at that point. And he got us a date 2 months in advance. So we had plenty of time to like work on stuff. And Brian came on as MD. And then after that, I was like, oh, this is not hard, because also it helped me kind of realize there's a lot about a cabaret that's hard, but it was not the parts that I thought were going to be difficult were not. Because for me, I realized I don't need to do a lot of connective tissue in between in the way that I think some people think you're quote unquote supposed to.
Yeah.
I was like, I can do whatever I want because this is my room and my time, and people have come to see me do my thing. What is my thing, you know? And so yeah, I start with a playlist generally. Any cabaret I'm doing or concert, you know, I'll start with a playlist and kind of like play through it, move the order around, and use it like as I'm walking down the street, kind of like feeling the flow from one thing into the next. Some shows that I've done have more of a through line or more thematically joined up. But a lot of what I like to do is also just what stuff that feels like a party and what stuff that feels like the roller coaster only I can take you on.
Correct.
And I think that that's when I see, because I see a lot of concerts and cabaret, both good, bad, and fine. And I think the stuff that to me really separates the people who are really excellent at it from the people who have such potential is number one, a willingness to pick stuff that isn't just songs that they sound good on, to know that that's not actually the best criteria by which to pick a song, in my opinion, but stuff that's going to help. What's the next twist or turn in that roller coaster you're taking people on, and what's the journey you want to take them on? For me, I don't like it to be too explicit. I mean, I have this one show called I Want to Be Your Man that's all material originally written for men. That's pretty explicit with the premises, and it's very easy to like, you know, there it is. But, you know, I'm still trying to pull the rug out from underneath the audience. Like I like people to get very comfortable and think we're doing one thing and then be like, oh, now I'm crying. That wasn't my plan. You know,
I love that. That's why people see you.
Yes.
I think that you're getting to the point, which is, at least for me, like what I'm hearing is that people want to see your cabaret because that is the journey that they are going on, that it is this unexpected and honest version of what you deliver, you know?
Yeah. The thing that I think really elevates the people who are the best at this form for me, because the best means different things to different people, right?
Yeah.
Are people who I watch their set list and I feel like I don't understand how they thought of that, because it feels so surprising and yet so inevitable that I'm like, how do you think of that? But also, how did I not already think of that?
Right.
Salty Brine is a cabaret performer who I think is magnificent at this. He performs at Joe's Pub a lot. Bridget Everett, obviously, just like, you know, a freaking master. Taylor Mack. And then you have someone like Marilyn May, who the woman's 94. She's been entertaining since, you know, the 60s earlier. And she gets up there and she starts out like the last time I saw her a few months ago, she did like a whole epic long medley about rainbows. And like, it was all like so nice and light and fun and kind of light entertainment. And then she gets about halfway through the show and I was just crying. And then I forget what all she was doing, but then she sings 50% and I was like a weeping mess. And then what did she start after that? She started, it wasn't If You Walked Into My Life, but it was something like that. And I just I was there with my brother and I was like, she's trying to kill me. Oh, I know what it was. It was Joey from Most Happy Fella. That's what it was. She went straight from 50% into Joey. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to take it. But it's that kind of thing. It's like, she's just so confident and like, I can take up space in the way I want to take up space. Because number one, I'm 94 and I've earned it. But also like, I have the confidence because I've been doing this for so many years. And I know like that assuredness. And I know I go to a Marilyn May show and I'm going to be taken care of and have an amazing time.
Yeah.
But she's not an alt cabaret performer like Bridget Everett or someone like that, but she's just someone who was like, so honest and true to what it is that she does better than anybody else.
Correct. Well, how have you found for yourself? I know we're like bouncing around, but this is where we are. How have you found that you working in a cabaret format has informed all the other ways in which you show up as an artist? Has it? Do you find that you bring parts of yourself into these other things? Is it like the other parts inform the cabaret? Is it just a mutual information situation? Like, what is that?
Yeah, I mean, blend? I think everything that you do as a human informs who you are as an artist, right?
Amen.
There's this great quote from a sculptor whose name escapes me. We are a landscape of all we have seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. And that's also what makes each artist so interesting. Anything from a visual artist to, someone who is a producer that mixes, pop hits. It's just your own experience and references are what's going to uniquely inform your worldview. So of course, as someone who's now at this point done a lot of cabaret, that influences how I walk into an audition room. Probably sometimes to, I don't want to say my detriment, because that's not even what I mean, but it has clarified my aesthetic point of view and what I want to spend my time on. So I'll still go to an EPA, but like I'm going to go and I'm going to do exactly the material I want to do, not in an aggressive, like screw you kind of way, but like, for instance, one of the last EPAs I went to before everything shut down, they were doing a full season and they said, feel free to sing from the show for the character you would like to play. Mm-hmm. And they were doing Joseph. So I went in and sang those Canaan days.
Good
now, clearly they weren't looking for a femme presenting brother, but I'm like, I have to tell you the lack of interest I have in playing the narrator. Like I know I'm never going to audition for that because I do not want to do it. But what I absolutely like want to play Ruben or whoever it is, depending on which version you're doing, like, yeah, that's the best part in the show, singing in a stupid French accent and, grandstanding. But like, I'm going to walk in and do what I actually want in a stronger way, I think, than I did before, because I have more confidence in how I take up space. That's not to say I'm like impervious to other people being energetically awful, because I'm extremely spongy. And I'm not somehow above that just because I've stood on a stage by myself now for a long time. But I think it has strengthened a lot of that, and also just strengthened my ideas of what I want to be going in for. It's sharpened and honed my viewpoints and my whole artistic being. I wouldn't have written an entire musical if I hadn't started doing cabaret. Like for me, there's a very clear linear journey. Like I've done all these shows that have gotten more sculpted as I've gone along. So I have the Brass Menagerie is like the most recent solo show that I've done, which is, it is fully scripted. Like there's full Tennessee Williams scenes. It's a lecture. It's structured as a lecture on Tennessee Williams, on the women of Williams, but it's so stupid. And when I tell you it's so stupid, there's one part where I introduce the rose tattoo and I just sing Bette Midler's The Rose in a heavy Italian accent. That's the entire bit. It doesn't change. But then for so many of the rest of them, I'm like changing lyrics to the whole Cat on the Hot Tin Roof segment as songs from Cats. Like I'm not
unreal.
It's only highbrow if you somehow think my stupid jokes aren't pulling the legacy of Williams down. But like that then led me to go like, oh, I actually like have a lot to say that might be able to be actually like written text and not just expressed through curation, which is what I think of a lot of cabaret as, like how you're hanging the art on the walls is how you're crafting your set list. What experience do you want someone to have when you walk into an art gallery? I do think of like a set list like that. But yeah, I don't think I would have made it to the realization that I was really ready and capable of writing a full book musical for multiple performers if I hadn't been spending so much time honing my voice. Yeah. And I don't mean my singing voice. Yeah. Like my point of view and what is worth all the agony of trying to get people to come see your show to do. So,
well, because that's all we have, right? I think we forget, and by we, I'm just going to like make the massive generalization, is so often we forget that is our superpower. Like the reason you exist as an artist is because of how you show up and the stories you tell and the perspective that you have, right? especially when I was younger, I just think back to a lot of what I was taught, frankly, and told is the way to show up, and all of the unlearning that I had to do in order to tear that down and realize, like, no, all of you are trying to make me small. I am not a small person. I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm very smart, and I'm quick, and that is my superpower. And you trying to, minimize me is actually taking away from the art that's being created. There are people like me, and then the people who are not. And that's the whole point. If you don't like me, cool, go find the person who's not me. But if you don't see who I am, you're not going to know that you don't want that.
Correct. Correct. So, if I'm trying to hide it by disguising myself as a cucumber when I'm a tomato.
Yeah. And I'm a bomb ass tomato. I don't know if I would consider myself. I think I'm more of like an avocado, maybe. If I'm thinking out loud.
Vegetable, if you want to be a vegetable.
Like when I'm ripe, ooh, it's good, and you could do a lot with it. But when it's not the time, it's not the time.
Then do not peel.
They don't. They can if they're but it's really very specifically timed. I don't know. I might have to think about what. Right, it's also like a fruit. Is it a fruit? Avocado's a fruit.
I think a tomato's technically a fruit too.
Right. So that's what I mean. Keeping them guessing. I love that life. That's cool. I have to unpack this on my own. But I think this is a wonderful segue into kind of, as you were talking, and I know this is something that you enjoy talking about as well, this idea that we have been told about type. Right. That we've been taught and told that there are these buckets that we must fit into by systems in place for a really long time. And there are people who are hopefully trying to dismantle that. None of that to be said. Here we have this word of type and brand and all of those buzzwords. So I'm curious to start, what is your definition of type? The way that people know it.
Yes. So for the listeners, and even someone who's looking at me can't tell this, I'm basically 6 feet tall. I've never been terribly thin, but even when I have lost a lot of weight, turns out I was still really tall. And I have always presented as kind of more mature and worldly, even though I grew up super sheltered, and so I got cast in a certain way from a very young age, which I now understand as to type, quote unquote, being cast to type. But you're in school and they tell you're a character actor. And I'm like, what does that mean? Is it code for fat? Is it just you're not dainty, or I don't believe you as a young person, even though you are a young person who, quite frankly, is tall, but still looks very young. When I was 20, I was 20, know? So as I've gotten older, I've kind of redefined type for myself as what is the through line that you bring to every performance, regardless of what the role demands. So for me, for instance, I know my type is I play intense people. It doesn't matter if I'm doing something like Boeing, that makes a lot of sense. I've played the German and Boeing a couple of times, and all the production stills are of my jaw practically being unhinged because I'm screaming so loudly. But then that also really applies to Fun Home. That's an intense person. I don't do casual well. That's why I don't do a ton of contemporary stuff unless the language is heightened, because I just don't do casual well. And it's not even that I play anxious people, it's that I play intense people. And that's really helped me reframe, what am I going to put myself out for? How do I see the world? And how does a person who's super intense see the world? So I would just encourage people to think about their type as being more of a quality rather than a physical descriptor, or even something like quirky or saucy. That's sure fine, but what that can be applied so broadly, and to me feels quite generic. And to someone else, intense might seem generic. So it is also about language that works for you. But to think about in a way that has nothing to do with how I might be looking at a given point in time, either with weight or hair or whatever, but more, what is the quality that is the through line in every role I've ever felt I was successfully cast in? And I think that has been a more liberating way of thinking about it for me.
If you were to sit with yourself, for somebody who is newly approaching perhaps this word or this idea and concept about it, is it more like, let's sit down with myself, close my eyes, and think about the way in which I feel most myself when I show up into a room? Is it more about what are the, like, if I think about all of the roles that I dream to play, what is the commonality through those? What is the angle through which one could find that?
I'm a lister, so I would do the latter. For me, it was like looking at my resume and looking at the stuff that I wished were on my resume and being like, well, what story is this telling? Not in a businessy, like, what is this telling someone who's looking at my resume, but like, what is this telling me about, like, what is the invisible thread I see connecting all of these things? Like, and what are the parts of these roles I feel like I was most successful in conveying, or that I most connected to most immediately? What is it about the parts that I feel like I could walk into tomorrow that why is that about that, you know? And like, there are other things that I think like would be a decent descriptor for me too. You know, I play high status. I often will play non-humans, you know. I've played a lot of like witches, fairies, octopus, you know. I've played a planet.
Wow. Okay.
Yes. But it's, so like that's another thing too. I was like, okay, like kind of more creature ethereal stuff. But to me, intense is more tactile, because that's something that I can read and I can look at it on the page and know, I know how to get into that. I think maybe that's it. It's looking at what is your way in, and what excites you about working on particular things, you know. So it might even be like, for some people, this might be less of like an adjective and might be more like, hey, I'm a classics queen, you know. I thrive in a period piece. I make the most sense on a stage when I am in Shaw, or when I am, you know, doing this or that, you know. And then there'll be people who like, I'm the most me if I'm playing like a gritty kind, but to think about it as a project thing and as about like the colors with which you paint, rather than what people see when they look at your headshot, which is a useful tool, but it is a tool and is not the thing that defines you. You'll change your headshot however many times over your career, you know, as you shift and change and grow. But like, it's just information. But I think, especially when you're younger, you get talked to about type so much. Once you've been around a bit too, I do think you get a little freed from this, because you have a body of work. Then you can talk about that rather than about a potential body of work. But I think when I were younger, if I were able to think of it as like, I don't know, you're just going to play like really intense people. You're going to play mentors. You're going to play maybe people who have like a really strong, I've played quite a few nuns, you know, like spiritual connections, but something that is like, you're vibrating at like kind of a maybe weird or higher frequency, you know, Magenta and Rocky Horror, something like that, like creature stuff. That would have been more useful to me, because it wasn't telling me anything about myself that I was perceiving as bad. It was more like something I could actively search out, think about, and get excited about, rather than trying to shift myself into a box that I was like, I don't know, is this the right place to be? Is this going to make an agent like me?
Well, I think that's it too, right? We're like, one way in is by seeking the validation of others. So it becomes this external way of processing, where the other one is this internal processing of, let's go inside. Where am I at? What stories do I want to tell? What am I drawn to material wise? The words that I want to say, how I want to be expressing myself as a human being, first and foremost. Like, I think for me, that's the other part of type that I guess I would love to dismantle. I rarely use it, because I feel,
I think it's terrible.
It's awful.
Yeah.
And by rarely, I mean, I don't know the last time I ever have. But I think for me, it's like, I think about the stories that I know I can bring humanity towards. Like, I think for me, that is my typing, right? Or I'm using massive quotes for those who are listening and not watching this on YouTube. But I think like there are some stories that I can absolutely, anybody can tell a story. Is that quote unquote right? No. However, like where am I going to best serve that story and the way in which I can bring the world off the paper through me as like the vessel? I think for me, that has been a helpful reframing of quote unquote typing, because that is also another way for me to decide like, oh, is this material that I actually want to be doing?
Yeah.
And should be doing, frankly.
You know, you'll get material for an audition. I'm thinking of this show that I went in. It was on Zoom because it was, 2021. But I went in for this show that I was one page into the script when I, got the call back, and I was like, oh, yes, this is right for me. This is worth talking about, a thing with actors. So I was called in for 2 roles in this show, and I started reading it. And by like page 3, I was like, they've called me in for the wrong parts. I get why they called me in for these. And they don't know me. This casting office didn't know me, but I should be called in for this other part. They were still seeking it. I was like, I get why they made that decision, but I think they're making that decision based on not having quite enough information, which I do because I'm the actor. And I had to like and all the sides were in a Dropbox. And so I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do all the sides that they've requested. And I'm going to do this side for this other character because it's a monologue and they can watch it or not because I'm uploading it separately under Actors Access. I'm not forcing them to watch it. I didn't like put it at the beginning of my videos or something like that. I put it in, and I put in the little like notes section. I was like, by the way, I really feel like I'm most appropriate for this part. So I put it on tape just in case you wanted to take a look at it. Because ultimately, like as an actor, you're hopefully like part of putting the puzzle together for them.
Correct.
And I got called back for that part because it was the right part for me. But it also was like reading that script. I was like, okay, yeah, all these characters are like super intense. It's super athletic. The language is heightened, but very anachronistic. It's extremely funny. I was like, this is all the stuff that I do really well, and I think it's like looking like what are the kinds of stories I want to tell and how do I best show up in those, and what do I do and this is the thing that certainly I wasn't taught well enough in school. What are the gifts I have to give that make me special? Not just like, oh, you have great stage presence, which is a lovely thing to hear, but that's not anything I have ever tried to do anything about. And certainly not something that I can shape. As opposed to like, oh, you know what, you're really good at this sort of thing. If you just like worked on this area, you might be able to expand your skills in this area. Maybe you should like work on like, you could have like more variation in your movement palette, but your vocal work is already like really fantastic. And so like, just keep developing that. And then, that will make you harder to catch in regards to like, it'll be very easy for you to go in and cold read heightened text at a moment's notice if you have to, but I do think that it's also partially that it's like really honing in on like, what do I excel at and what makes me excited? Because there are also things, going back to the narrator thing. Yeah. I'm good at belting really high. I don't want to play that part. I have no desire, It's like other people would murder many people to play Elphaba. And I could not care less about that. And I feel like if you're going to go through the, frankly, trauma of having to play that part 8 times a week, you should really want to do it,
Yeah. Well, talking about the things that you do really well, as a dialect coach.
Yeah.
You're very good with heightened language. You're very good with language and sound, as we have discussed just generally. How did that kind of come to be? What feelings do you have as you do that? Are they different than you when you are performing?
Yes. Yes.
Great. And we're done.
It's a very natural outgrowth of my skill set as an actor. I was always very good at dialect. And so it made sense that would be, not everyone who's good at something can teach it. I do come from a long line of teachers. So there's also that. It's like a natural fit based on what I'm good at, which is teaching, communicating things to people and like making these sounds. I'm also very anal retentive, which works really well when you're like, well, you're not actually shaping the it's too far back in the mouth and actually you could get your lips more around it, like that kind of thing. I have a very strong ear and I'm extremely pedantic. So I started doing that basically in college. I was a TA for my work study in the voice and speech department my senior year. And so then we moved to the city and everyone would ask me. And eventually I was like, I don't think anything of paying my friends who are accompanists to play. Why don't I charge people for this? And so, it just kind of followed from that. And because there's not nearly as many people who do that as do acting, there's a lot of more of jobs available and you get referred a lot. I will say for a while, it was so great because it got me into rehearsal rooms instead of my retail job.
Yeah.
But after a certain point, really after Kinky Boots and then a couple of big workshops that I was on, I was in the rehearsal rooms so much behind the table, which I don't mind, but I was just like, there's not enough time for me to be an actor in the way I want to be. I was trying to keep it 50-50, thinking that quote unquote should be enough. And I had a moment where I was like, is it my ego that's keeping me trying to pursue acting? Should I actually just go full-time into voice and text work? Because that's a very natural thing for a lot of people to do. There's just more work. And you can command a higher price at different, because it's just a more specialized skill.
Yeah.
And I thought about it and I was just like, well, even if it is just my ego, I still think I want to be acting. And so I stopped taking gigs that would require me to be in the rehearsal room like 3 to 5 days a week. I was like, I'm only going to do like consulting or smaller projects, just not things where I need to be on site all the time. And then I was still working on Kinky Boots, but by that point it was more just like come in, go on tour for a couple of days, watch the show, blah, 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 come in at my leisure. They were really chill about that. So that was more like, at that point, it was running itself in a much easier way, and I didn't have to be there all the time. And so I really learned from that, like, oh, no, I need to be acting far more than 50% of the time in order to feel like I'm the artist I want to be.
Yeah.
And so now I definitely still do a lot. I worked on Space Dogs, but that was the kind of thing where like they only needed me to come in a few days and to one preview. Like they didn't need me to be there suddenly for 4 weeks, and for the right project, I might still do that sort of thing, but it would really have to be the right project. And also for me, I feel more comfortable accepting positions where it's a show I couldn't really be in. I found a lot of directors who didn't know me beforehand don't realize I'm not a hobbyist as a performer. And that I think really makes me feel really defensive. And I don't like to have that energy in a room.
Yeah.
But like I did dialects for a Sherlock Carol that was off Broadway over the holidays. But that was a room full of people I have worked with as an actor, including the director. So like, I didn't feel like I had that part of my identity was being squashed. It was in fact useful because they were doing a comedy. And I, I just found that to be a much easier, gentler room for me because of that, rather than like, I don't know, as someone who like has such identity, I have so many feelings about my identity as a performer. I get a little weirdly touchy about that, and I'm just like trying to find ways to not rile that up, and a lot of that's who you're working with and how often you have to be in the room. So I find it's really helpful for me to also, if I could do more voice and text directing kind of stuff, that I find really more creatively juicy than dialect coaching. But it's just also important for me to feel like I can work with the actors in a creative way, so it doesn't feel like pedantic and like there's a right and a wrong way. Like we can craft something together. If I have the time to do that with the actors, it makes it more fulfilling for me. But I will say it is the day job. I have, after many years of doing it, I will say it is definitely like, I love that it's creative. I love that my day job is something that's still in the arts, but it definitely feels sometimes like, now I have to go, do my thing that pays the bills before I can go do the fun, silly stuff that I like to do, wherever.
Yeah. You are so, we're all growing, but it feels, and learning, but it feels like you are so clear about, at least in this moment, who you are and the worlds you would love to occupy, the spaces that you feel most seen and heard in, the strengths that you have to pull from, to bring into a room, recognizing that is a gift for others. Like, I feel like these are such incredible pillars for artists generally. And it's just really awesome to hear them. And not that I don't know this, that's why you're literally on this podcast, because I think you're like dope as hell. But it's just so cool to hear it throughout all of the ways in which you show up in your artistry, and that it's consistent. Consistency is such a weird word because it seems like it takes away all of like the joy and the fun and the creativity out of it, because you're consistent and you show up in this, but there's something about knowing in an authentic, honest way when somebody is consistent, that you know the type of human that they are when they show up, no matter what they're doing. And there is a reliability in that allows the others in the space to actually bring themselves, because there's nothing frenetic about that.
Yes. There's just no reason for a rehearsal room to feel so frantic. I mean, I can think of a few reasons, but like the number of times I've been in a rehearsal room, I'm like, why are we all, myself included, freaking out in this moment? Yeah. We're just making a stupid play. Yeah. Like we're doing a farce. Why are we all about to kill each other? Right. Like that seems what? Like when you take a step back, which I have been trying to also get, that's part of it too, is getting better at stepping back in the moment rather than like later being like, oh, you know what, I got a little heated there. And I'm very, I was raised in I was raised in Texas, where it is very non-confrontational in many ways, is the mode of communication. So instead I'll like bottle it up and sit on it and resent it for years. And as I move forward in my life, I'm like, I don't want or need to carry that around. Why am I letting so-and-so take up space in my psyche?
Exactly.
They still do, some of these people, but I find that it's more people from the past when it was much harder for me to let go of those things than now, where I am more quickly able to like extricate myself, psychically from the situation and be like,
do you do that by simply just being like, all right, let's take a step back. Haha, this is a farce. Why am I being so serious?
Not necessarily, because some rooms that's just not going to happen. Some rooms, they're just hostile people. I'm thinking of one farce in particular I worked on where the director was just, I don't even want to get into it, or I will get upset because it was just like, but it's by like talking about it with my therapist. It's about writing about it, like just like freehand journaling, just so you can, this is a thing I found very helpful when I'm on a regional gig. And so you're like in the bubble and maybe things are not going well with a couple of your coworkers. Doing like a few pages of freehand in the morning, very morning pages style, helps me burn off some of that. So I don't walk into the room with yesterday's like pissy mood. I can just walk in and be like, you know what? It does suck that they said that, but I can still go in and try and see if today could be a good day. Yeah. Breathing also, it's really about letting myself breathe through the situation rather than clench. Truly, it's just that like teaching my body, I don't need to hold on to this. I don't need to hold on to this, and then really when you are in a situation that is good and is healthy, really taking stock of that, talking about it. When I'm in a good situation, I make sure I talk about it with my therapist a lot, because I know my brain that loves to hold on to things that tell me I am bad and worthless, I need to habituate telling myself I am good. I am actually easy to work with when I'm working with someone who's there in good faith, and so I need to constantly be affirming and habituating, like, this is good, this went well, and to find those people and work with them a lot. Because it's just, none of us need to be in hostile situations. There are people who are great to work with for everyone. You hear horror stories about some people that other people love. And I'm like, all right, well, then they should work with them. And I need to go to a situation that's different. So a lot of it is after the fact, unfortunately. But I am getting, the after the fact is happening faster and faster as I do more work on myself.
So good. Sense. Yes, that's so good. I love that. On that note, what a wonderful little bow of everybody work on yourselves. No, that's not the takeaway with this. That's not the takeaway necessarily.
Great, friends.
Therapy is great. Before we go away for now, is there anything that is currently on your mind and your heart that I know we bounced around a bunch, but anything that is like left that you want to leave the listener with that we did not get to?
I did want to give some dialect resources that I get asked about a lot.
Love.
I could just do that. I will say this is someone who's listening to a podcast like this is probably a person who's less likely to do the sort of thing I'm about to say. But there are a lot of people who I would say are working acquaintances to medium friends who will sometimes drop into my DMs or shoot me a text asking for like hints or this or that when it could be Googled or when they could hire me. So I'm just saying I'm on a podcast where I am giving this information gladly as a resource for free. And there are many people who in interviews will do this sort of thing. Go listen to an interview or Google, and don't necessarily ask people for something that is a service that they should be compensated for. I'm about to give you a bunch of ways to do like dialect work on the cheap.
Great. Take out your pens and papers. We can also put this in the show notes too.
For sure. So these are, I mean, there's probably many of your listeners who will already know these, but the best resource, the two best resources for me that I use for everything are dialectsarchive.com, which is a collection. It used to be IDEA. So if you also Google International Dialect of English Archive, you'll find many, 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 many recordings from all over the world. It's so great. And they're reading the same passage over and over and over. So you can hear them, compare them to different regions. That's a great resource. But the best is YouTube. You just have to know what to look for, because a lot of people will just like search accents, and then you're finding people doing accents. You're finding people doing like a tour of blah, blah, blah. And that's great. But there's so many like beauty vloggers and people who like, I have found people doing the weirdest things that have been great dialect samples. So you might not always know what a great dialect sample sounds like, but just poke around and find things that help you get into the text. Because ultimately, dialect work is just there to help you storytell better, right? It's not, you're not trying to literally fool anyone. You're not a spy. You know, you're not in the Americans where you're going to get like executed by someone if someone finds out you're not American, right? So just poking around, finding like politicians giving speeches in English, travel videos where it's like, come to the town of Killarney, and they have someone doing that. Like, be creative in what you're looking for and trying to find. Local news stories are great, Weather Channel stuff. You know, there's all sorts of things that you can find. Also, podcasts are a great resource because people podcast from all over. There's like, you know, I was trying to find Cork accents for this production of Once I was coaching, and I found a lot of great podcasters from Cork, radio shows that had been put onto podcasts. There's just so many resources available to you. Just dig a little deeper than, you know, London accent, you know, because there's a ton out there that you can use for self-study. So that's what I would say for the dialect stuff. And if you're at all interested in cabaret, I just think it's best to see a bunch of stuff, whether that is in person or online, so you can understand what you are responding to and what you are not. Drag shows are great too for that. Like just to see different people with singular voices and visions. And it's not that you want to copy that, but it's like what has made that person so unique and so specific. And watching other people find that in themselves, I think is one of the ways you can unlock that in your own work, you know, is again, not to copy, but to daydream about how they got there, and to like look at material and go like, how do I see this? And what can I put it up against that might be surprising, that makes sense in my brain, but might not make sense or might not be the first thing that someone else would think of because they haven't lived it. I have. So that's how I'd say. You can also look at that sort of thing.
The most. Thank you for all of that.
I
hope y'all took notes, and also you can listen to this back because this is a podcast. With that, thank you so much for taking time, for being here with us, for sharing so openly. How can the listener respectfully and kindly reach out to you?
Yes, let me also be clear. I love people reaching out, and I love if someone's asking me, hey, how do I get to be a dialect coach? That is a different question than, can you do my homework for me? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Which is what that other one can feel like. I'm very accessible via Instagram at Amy Jo Jackson. That's Jo, J-O, not J-O-E. And my website, amyjojackson.com, has a contact form. I also have a podcast that I co-host with my partner called And Almost Starring, where we'll watch a film and we'll fantasy cast it, and then we'll talk about who was up for it, who was almost cast in it, who was cast and who was fired, and it's very fun. So that's that as well. We also have an Instagram at and almost starring. Yeah, and I have a drag king character called Nigel Kane. You can find somewhere on my Instagram as well. That is a fairly recent development of my life, but I love him very dearly. He's Michael Caine's less famous but more fun younger brother.
I am living.
Yeah.
I'm living for this. Oh my God. And she goes and Googles this right now. That's where it's real find me right after this. Thank you. And more soon.
Yes, please. Thanks for having me. And thanks, listener, for listening.